Hello, and thank you for joining me on this podcast from Experience, the Grief Collection. I'm your host, Bianca Welsh. I'm a mum, a lost mum, a restaurateur with a behavioural science degree, and a proclivity for all things to do with trauma, grief, and mental illness. I've got a lot of personal lived experience, and this is the podcast I wish I had after experiencing my own grief and loss. So why would I do a grief podcast? What might I add to the vast podcast world? I'll provide you with stories that might help you feel seen, feel less alone in what you're experiencing or have experienced, perhaps an idea on how to navigate the healing journey, because there's no playbook for grief. There's no guide. We all grieve differently, thus we all heal differently. Perhaps you're helping support someone on their grief and loss journey. Maybe you're just curious about how some people overcome the worst time of their lives. The thing with grief is that this is the one given in life. It is the one thing we will all experience at some point, the loss of someone or something that we love. As the great wordsmith and musician that is Nick Cave quotes in a letter to a fellow griever, if we love, we grieve. That's the deal. That's the pact. Grief and love are forever intertwined. Grief is the terrible reminder of the depths of our love, and, like love, grief is non-negotiable. End quote. Yet we rarely talk about it in the Western world. We're never prepared for it, but perhaps we can never be prepared for it. I wasn't, but I hope if we were more open to talking about it and aware of other people's journeys and stories, we might feel less alone in the dark depths of grief, and perhaps the healing journey might not feel as daunting. Just a heads up, in this episode we talk about some sensitive topics including baby loss, birth, stillbirth, termination for medical reasons, feticide, suicidal thoughts and experiences of trauma. If you're not in the right headspace for that today, maybe come back another time. If anything in this episode brings up difficult feelings, please reach out to someone you trust or one of the supports listed in the show notes. I acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the original owners of this island, Trawana Lutruwita, Tasmania. I'm on the country where the Taranata Panir, Paninaher and Lita Myarina clans of the Stony Creek Nation converged. I pay my respects to elders past and present and recognise the deep connection to the land and waterways. I express my gratitude in being able to live, work and play on this beautiful country. Sovereignty was never ceded. I honour the rich tradition of storytelling as a vital way of passing down knowledge, culture and history through generations. On our first episode today, we're going to be talking with my husband, James. We have been together for 20 years this year, married for recently 13 years. We have been through lots of good and bad times together. We work together, we're business partners, we own a restaurant and we used to have restaurants, plural. We've had an amazing journey learning how to work together, how to live together, how to parent together. But I guess the hardest thing we've been through is to grieve and how to grieve together. We experienced the loss of our son in 2022 and this is our story. So James, tell me a little bit about you before we get started.
A little bit about me. I am a sommelier by trade, so I enjoy evaluating wines. I'm a distance runner and a running coach. And I'm pretty much an all-round larrikin.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. This structure of this episode is going to be a bit different to the future ones that you will hopefully want to listen to. And today we're just going to kind of try and have a conversation, not necessarily an interview, where we're going to talk about our experience so you can understand where I'm coming from, where we're coming from, and then a little bit about our journey post losing our son and the different way we have navigated grief, because we've certainly found, even though we went through the exact same thing at the exact same time, we have definitely grieved differently and healed very differently. I hope that you can take something away from that. We have an older son, Claude, Giacomo Claude Francis Welsh. He is 8.5 now. He was 5 and a bit when all this happened. He is a absolute wrecking ball of a boy. He's a classic boy. He was very challenging in those first 4 years, really. He's a firecracker. He has a lot of personality, and he really kept us on our toes. We've both found parenting very challenging, as everyone does, and we're very honest and open about how challenging that has been and continues to be. So we were really hesitant to have a second too soon. We knew with our work, with our businesses, had 3 at the time, that we needed to be really conscious of making that decision and adding to our family, thus adding more noise and more stress. And I know James won't mind me saying, but James has a long journey of mental illness and poor mental health, and we knew that if we were to add another child to our family, we just had to do it in a time where we were all feeling comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, I've experienced postnatal depression possibly 3 times now, but definitely 2. It's something that you need to be in tip-top shape to climb the mountain.
So come 2021, we were still in COVID. We kind of navigated that as best we could with hospitality businesses. And I remember we had zipped away for a staycation in our state because Tasmania, we're in Tasmania, Australia. We're an island off an island. And no one was allowed to come into Tasmania. They locked the borders for the safety of our community, and we had a little staycation, so we took ourselves off to the far west coast, which is a whole different world over there. And I remember we were tossing up the idea of having another child, and we probably had a little bit too much to drink. And James said, because I guess at the time, and we are still, but at the time we were very much fate believers, James said, let's toss a coin. And heads will be, yes, we will try for another baby, because of course it's not a given that just because you try doesn't mean you'll get a child. And tails, no. And James flipped a coin, and I remember I burst into tears when James said, what do you think it is? And at this point, I'm not super maternal. I'm not a super maternal person, and I was shocked at my response. I realised how much I wanted another child to add to our family when James asked me, what do you think it is?
And it's sort of a testament to tails never fails. Tails did fail.
Tails did fail. And it was heads. And we kept, you kept that coin for it was just a 50-cent coin. You kept that for quite some time. And we were very fortunate. We fell pregnant straight away. I'm very lucky we haven't experienced fertility issues, and my heart goes out to those that do, because that's a whole nother level of grief and loss that I personally haven't had to experience. So I really feel for those that do. And we were due in February 2022 with our second son. We knew it was going to be a boy. I wanted to know the gender very early, so we did the iGene test, and we knew it was a boy straight off. That is another thing that I will sidestep for a moment and acknowledge, that we still experienced gender disappointment. And I truly believe, having experienced the loss of a baby, that it is separate to a healthy child. You can still experience gender disappointment, but it is separate to having a healthy baby. I know that there are many thoughts about it, and particularly when you look on socials and keyboard warriors saying, how dare you be disappointed in the gender, you've got a healthy baby, how lucky are you? And yeah, absolutely, definitely are. But I've certainly seen some threads, because I haven't been too game to put too much out there about it, that you can still experience the disappointment, because it is another grief and loss. I had these ideas that I would have a daughter and help plan her wedding one day and do the girly things that I didn't experience with my son. And I really struggled with that for quite a few months, of getting my head around that we were going to have another boy, because we were very certain we would only have 2 children.
I guess that's also heavily laden with your birth story, which is a whole different discussion, but the way gender is understood in certain countries.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm adopted from South Korea. The thread of loss, I guess that's deep in my bones, and that I sadly understand a lot more than I wish I did for my birth mother. James, did you feel like you experienced that gender disappointment as well?
Yeah, I did. I remember with Claude, we were pretty keen on a girl, and I sort of wanted a mini version of Bianca. And yeah, I mean, I got a pretty stern view on it, particularly after what happened to us, that a healthy baby is a blessing, and then to have a gender preference over the top of it can seem privileged. But with Herb, yeah, I don't remember.
I do. Yeah, I do. You're quite disappointed. You were having a lay down and I got the results.
I guess I was more concerned that Herb would be a wrecking ball like Claude, and I didn't know I could deal with double the trouble.
So I had a very uncomplicated pregnancy. All fine, all normal, went through a private obstetrician. I'd had a scan on Tuesday the 21st of December 2021. I was 32 and 4 days. I'm just looking at my notes because for me dates and numbers feel very important to me through the journey of our son Herbert. Come the 5th of January and I was 34 and 5 days at this point. So just over 2 weeks. I'd had a very healthy, normal scan. Emily, our obstetrician, I recall very vividly at the one just before Christmas, she said, "He is perfect." Those words, "he is perfect," just a concreted in my brain. I almost cancelled the 5th of January booking because, as I mentioned before, COVID was still a thing and we'd actually just opened our borders to interstate visitors. And that meant we were knocked out with COVID. So we had, I think, a dozen staff have to call in on that particular day that either the person they were living with had tested positive or they were feeling unwell and they needed to go and get tested. So we were in a bit of crisis mode trying to figure out how we'd navigate work. I was obviously heavily pregnant, so I couldn't do a huge amount, but I was trying to do what I could from a desk or from home. And we thought it was school holidays, so we thought we'd take Claude with us to start to bond and start to connect with the baby. He hadn't been to any appointments then. And at that one just before Christmas, I very clearly remember Emily speaking about how much hair Herbert had, and you could see it waving in the amniotic fluid, and it was quite remarkable. We told Claude about that and we wanted him to go and see that. So the 5th of January we go in and Emily, she's taking a little bit longer than usual with the routine checkup and said, "Have you been unwell?" And said, "No, I'm maybe just hot and bothered and tired." And then she puts the scanning, the thing down and turns to me and just says, "I'm really sorry, but there's something wrong with his brain. His ventricles are enlarged and I need you to go to Hobart immediately," which is the capital of our state. We live in Launceston. It's 2 hours away. "You need to go to Hobart immediately for a second opinion and a plan of what we're going to do." And it was a huge shock. My studies of psychology meant that I had an idea, or I sort of had an awareness that the ventricles being enlarged was really bad, and I knew that it was irreversible. But I do remember James asking, I remember you saying, can this be reversed? And Emily said, "No, I'm sorry." She didn't go into too much, but she said that there would be a level of disability that we would now be facing and obviously health complications for our son. I don't remember leaving the clinic. I can barely remember Claude being there. I remember getting in the car and knowing I needed to go and get some bloods done immediately. I was just a mess. I was crying and completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, it was a bombshell to say the least. We got out of there and got Claude sorted and got the bloods done. And yeah, I remember vividly too that Emily was quite factual and certain, even though she sought a second opinion from a top obstetrician in Hobart. But she certainly didn't mince her words, and she was convinced that what she was seeing on the scan was exactly what it was. To be told that in such a short period of time from late December to early January, we didn't foresee a bump in the road or a shitstorm that it was.
We'd had the most amazing Christmas away. It was the first time ever we have had Christmas off from the restaurants. We had 4 days down at the beach and it was just absolute heaven. And I sadly feel like that was the last time that I've of course had many happy moments since then, but I do truly feel that was my last time of feeling blissfully happy. I had no idea that the world could feel the way that it does now at that time. And I was so ready and prepared for our son. I was so excited to be a mum another time. It was a first-time mum. I found it incredibly challenging. I really didn't enjoy it to begin with. I found the loss of control and the loss of me really hard. And I wished kind of every stage away. I was like, oh, I want you to be able to sit up. I want you to crawl. I want you to walk. I want you to do this. I was always looking to the next stage. And I look back now and I do regret that. So I was really ready to just embrace and enjoy this time. I had actually planned a proper maternity leave. I'd set up someone to be in my role for a few months, and that was really big for me. And I was just so excited. So we left the clinic and made our way to organising Claude to be cared for, organised work for that. We were gone. We would be absent, and that they would have to figure out all this COVID craziness sort of on their own. And we have amazing business partners and an amazing team that picked up the pieces for us while we were absent. We were so confused as to why this had happened and what was happening. And I remember thinking, what have I done? What have I done differently? And is that the cause of what's happened to his brain? So we arrange for Claude to be cared for. We drive down to Hobart. I have some bloods done just before we leave, and thankfully the pathology staff could see that I was incredibly distressed and they rushed me through. They didn't make me wait in the waiting room because obviously there was tons of people there when I got there. And then we made our way to Hobart. So I was sent down for an MRI and to see the specialist. We actually realised we knew the specialist obstetrician, and I guess that gave us a little bit of comfort that we weren't going to a complete stranger. I actually had to wait the next day to have the MRI, so we just spent the night in Hobart waiting because we were hoping to get in that afternoon, but of course it didn't happen. We had to wait the next day. And I just remember trying to fill our time was torture. I mean, there was no escape. I was visibly and hugely pregnant. He was obviously moving. I was almost 35 weeks at this point. It was summer. I didn't want to walk around. I didn't want any more people to see that I was pregnant that didn't need to see me pregnant. I had been on the news a heap over the last few months, heavily pregnant, because there was often a lot of request for comment about COVID and the state of hospitality. So I tend to get asked a fair bit. And on the radio and in the newspaper, I felt like everyone knew I was pregnant, and I had this real shame about that there was something wrong and that people would see that something was wrong. So we just sort of hid in the hotel room and tried to sort of be as normal as possible because there was nothing we could do. And I think that was a really traumatizing part of these next couple of weeks for us, because there was nothing we could do. In a world where you feel like you have a lot of control of your life and what happens, it was so hard to just sit with what was happening. I think we went out for dinner to I think we went to Pepina. We went to like a really good restaurant.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. I guess it was hard. People think you can see the exterior, but you don't really know what's going on in someone's life. Like we were sitting there both wondering what's going to be in front of us and how and why us, and then that pain of having to wait for results and scans and things where you sort of hope for the best, but you have to prepare for the worst.
I remember feeling a little bit awkward about going to dinner at a good restaurant. Like when you're in a crisis, you should be, I don't know, battening. I don't know. I just had this slight bit of shame that we'd gone to a good restaurant and that if someone saw us, they'd be like, oh, they mustn't be that stressed about what's going on because, look, they're out for dinner. Because I guess you associate going out for dinner to a nice restaurant as happy times. But for us, good food is food for our soul. It provides us a lot of comfort. And we knew some of the staff there and they certainly provided us just a moment of relief. And I guess that was one of the ways that we found helped us cope through that time. So go in the next day for the MRI and we were in the waiting area. It was quite tricky to get James to come through for everything with me because it was COVID. All of the medical services, anywhere you went, it was only allowed to be the patient. You weren't allowed to have a support person. But fortunately, they were somewhat briefed of what the situation was and James was allowed to come along with me. We were sitting there waiting and there was a briefing behind a curtain of another medical team that were about to get another patient in for an MRI. And there was like a team of, 6 or 7 people.
Mm.
And the lead doctor was like, right, here's the plan. We have a 90-kilo
14-year-old kid.
Yep, severely autistic, can be quite violent, needs to have an MRI, claustrophobic. And to get him in the MRI machine, they were needing to have this plan of that the mum was going to drive up to the driveway. One person was going to run in with a bed sheet to hold them down and the other person, the anaesthetist, was going to then sedate him. Then they were going to get him onto a stretcher and get him up to have this MRI. And James and I just overheard, and the way they were briefing was incredibly professional. They were obviously trying to help this boy. He clearly had some health issues they needed to assess. And James and I just sat there and overhearing this, because I know that with ventricle enlargement, it could result in a high level of disability, intellectual, physical. It could mean we would end up with a severely autistic son. And we both sat there in silence, but just looked at each other with tears in our eyes, just thinking perhaps that is what's in front of us. That is the life that we will be facing. And that is the challenges that our son might need to face. And it was really confronting. I went into the MRI machine and I had to lay there for, it was almost an hour on my own with my own thoughts, which was, again, another awful part of the whole process. The headphones go on you, and for some reason they didn't play any music, which I realise now that they could have, just for a bit of comfort or some sort of distraction. But I literally laid there in silence with just the sounds of the machine going and thinking all the possibilities, what we were facing and the level of disability we were potentially looking at. We were thinking about selling our house. Our house is 2 stories, so we've got stairs. We were thinking about what we'd need to do with work. There were a lot of things that we were trying to consider, but the thing that we were potentially looking at was just a moderate level of disability, or there was also potential that there was going to be no disability. The MRI was meant to help us make some decisions and understand. So once we got the results, a few hours later we went to see the specialist obstetrician and the specialist neonatal paediatrician. And they believed that what our son had was severe ventricular megaly, which means that he had a block in a cerebral aqueduct. It's like a little part at the back of the brain that drains the fluid. And they thought that there was a block there that was causing his ventricles to enlarge because the fluid wasn't being able to be drained off. Babies, their ventricles are meant to measure at 10, and at that point, our son's ventricles measured at 22 and 24 respectively. So they weren't even, which I also knew was a bad thing when they're uneven. That also presents further issues. It was shocking to find this out, and they weren't sure of what level of disability we would be looking at, whether it would present when he was at school, when he maybe starts to crawl or walk or starts to develop language. It's very unknown. And the cause of ventriculomegaly is also unknown. It can just happen for whatever reason. So at that point, that sort of gave me a little bit of comfort.
Yeah, I guess the measurements were something that we were pretty subscribed to, and I remember thinking, I hope they've got it wrong. When we left the first scan in Launceston to the MRI, I thought, there's a chance that it's been incorrectly read, and to get some more accurate imaging and to know that it's twice as bad as it should be. It certainly made the story more grim, and it certainly made us lose a bit of hope that this is not a furphy.
So we're then sent home, and the plan was in another 2 weeks. In another 2 weeks, the plan was to do another MRI. And best case scenario would be that his ventricles had not enlarged anymore, and that we would then make the next decision as to what we were going to do, whether we were going to give birth and then do neurosurgery as soon as he was born, or just let the pregnancy and me go into labour naturally. So to go home and just live your life waiting for the next scan was, again, just torture. To go about your day was really, really hard and confusing.
And that's coming from someone that compartmentalises very, very well.
I can generally put things aside and I go, right, I need to stress about that in 2 days' time, so I'll do that then. Or, it was incredibly difficult. So the specialist did say, look, let's do an amniocentesis. Anyone that doesn't know what that is, that's a big needle that goes into the amniotic fluid to extract a bit of that and to then get sent off and tested for more genetic anomalies, but also to see if there's anything else going on in there. And it's very invasive and very uncomfortable. It's a huge needle that goes into your belly. And it can cause, there's a risk of obviously infection, but there's a risk that you might go into early labour. But because he was, at this point, he would have been 35 weeks, that if I had have gone into labour early, then that would have been okay. He would have been okay. And even though I'd had the IgG test, it doesn't quite test for everything. So an amniocentesis then gets tested for all the rare genetic disorders that might have presented. So they just wanted to be sure. So we went back down. It was another 3 days later, we went back to Hobart. And I just want to say that those drives, because it's a 2 hour, and actually there was roadworks at the time, so it was 2.5 hours to get to Hobart. And the time in the car was also extremely excruciating. The first time we went down, the initial time, I remember we had the radio on, I think, just for background, and we were just in shock. We just were like, what do you talk about? It was a really strange time. Like, I found those car rides really hard.
Yeah, painful. Your brain can't get too far down the road to think about hopes and dreams and worry about the football. Or you're in a point of waiting.
So I go down for the amniocentesis, and it's very uncomfortable. It's terrifying. I don't like needles just as much as the next person, but I did it. It's over within a couple of minutes at most, and you need to sit there and have an ECG on your belly just to check that the baby's okay for about 20 minutes, and then you can go off on your day. So they just check their heart rate. Lindsay was our specialist obstetrician down in Hobart, and she said that she narrowly missed his sizable
ball sack,
which we needed those comical relief moments throughout this process. And as James said at the start, he's quite the larrikin, he's quite the jokester. I guess I have become like him by proxy, being with him for so long. And we really needed that comical relief and lightheartedness to get through. And we sort of joked that, well, was at least he'll be well endowed. But I remember that Lindsay said, your bloods just came back. And she said, it looks like you've had toxoplasmosis recently. And she said, oh, but I think it's just a furphy. And it's so clear in my mind that she used those words. I think it's just a furphy, but I'll just do some more research. And I didn't think anything of it. I barely knew what toxoplasmosis was. I just thought it was from cats. And I'm like, well, we don't have a cat. I haven't been unwell. I've got no idea. Maybe it was because it can be an old infection and it can just lay dormant in your system. So I just didn't think anything of it. And also if you get congenital toxoplasmosis, I've learnt since, is that the organs will all enlarge. So liver, kidneys, all their organs, major organs will enlarge. And she said there's nothing that would indicate that this is happening to him, but I'll just do a bit more research. So we go home and we go back to Launceston and try to live life as normal as possible, trying to keep the stress from Claude, but we're still being honest that there's something wrong with the baby, and that's why we're going back to Hobart. We didn't sugarcoat it, but we certainly tried to shield him as much as we could. We then get a phone call from Lindsay a few days later to say that they've actually confirmed that it is toxo. They sent my amniotic fluid off to infectious diseases in Melbourne, and they checked my bloods. Legally, the bloods you first have when you are tested to check if you are pregnant, they actually need to be kept on file for 12 months. And they were able to source those and check my bloods, and it was not present at the first initial bloods I had to confirm I was pregnant. This was shocking, and I remember we just had a partners meeting with our business partner for work, and I was just doing a bit of office work, and I remember her calling and she's like, I'm so sorry, I have to deliver this information over the phone, but I want you to know as soon as possible we've confirmed toxoplasmosis. It's in the amniotic fluid. And that means that this has gone from bad to worse. It would mean that the cause of his enlarged ventricles is actually that the fluid has thickened. It's no longer thought to be a block. It's that the fluid has thickened. And that means it's much harder to drain. Neurosurgery is going to be far more complicated, and probably multiple neurosurgeries might be required. He might be born blind because toxo affects the retinas. And we're now looking at not just a mild to moderate disability spectrum, we were looking at severe spectrum of disability, both physical and intellectual.
I remember digesting that information. We quite often talk to each other and go, do we understand that correctly? And when you're sort of heavily stressed, that front part of your brain just turns off, and we both sort of trying to make heads and tails of a lot of medical jargon, just unpack it and go, shit, is she saying what we think she's saying?
I remember any new information being really hard to take in. I would have to really focus. Like I'd have to say to myself, concentrate on the words that she's saying, because I couldn't really comprehend. It was like someone was going blah, 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 blah. Because, yeah, in trauma and in stressful situations, yeah, you're right, that prefrontal cortex would just shut down. And I almost could physically feel it shut down. So at this point, when Lindsay delivers this information, I'm on the phone on my own, and James is in just the next room, and I just cried. I just could not stop crying, because now I felt like it was all my fault, because it was toxoplasmosis. I'd ingested it somehow. I'd caught it somehow. As I mentioned, we don't have a cat. I was racking my brain as to how this had happened, and I felt completely responsible. I asked Lindsay how I could have got it, because I said we don't have a cat. She said you can get it from undercooked red meats, unwashed fruit and veg, sometimes contaminated water, but that's quite rare in Australia. It can be transferred so much more easily than I had ever understood. And I was really conscious and aware of listeria through pregnancy. I didn't eat any soft cheeses, but otherwise I was really confident about my food, because we have a restaurant. We know good suppliers, good producers. We have a lot of trusted suppliers and producers. I almost look back and think that I was cocky about the way I went around food, and I am assuming that that is how I got it. But I'll never know, and that will always be a source of grief for me, that I will never know how I got it. So what they had assumed then was that I'd got it later in pregnancy, so maybe 18, 22 weeks thereabouts, and because it was later in pregnancy, the placenta actually can't filter it out as well as it could have if I got it early in pregnancy.
I remember we were away at that time and you thought it might have been a salad or something. It's not something you wouldn't order when you're pregnant.
No, that's right. And I share this not to instill fear of anyone who's pregnant out there listening to this or looking to be pregnant in the future. It's extremely rare in Australia. What happened to me, congenital toxoplasmosis, I found some studies and it's super, super rare. My obstetrician and the neonatal paediatrician, they used to work at Royal Children's in Melbourne. They've been doctors and specialists for a very, very long time, and neither of them had ever seen a case like this ever. And they consulted with all of their colleagues on the Big Island, we call it the mainland, and no one had ever seen a case like this before either. So that statistical anomaly kind of gave me a little bit of comfort, like that I hadn't been reckless or something. The rarity of it did give me a little bit of comfort, but I still felt all the guilt and shame. And to fast forward to now, I still, I've had a lot of therapy. I'll talk about that later. I've done a lot of work on myself, but I will always have a level of guilt that what happened is all my fault. I think I'll carry that till I go to my grave. I'd say that I felt it 120% back then. And now if I had to put a number on it, I'd probably feel that it's still 30% my fault. I think no matter how much therapy or how much work I'll continue to do on that last bit, I'll still always feel it. So we came home. I remember I just wanted to escape being pregnant. I wanted to get out of my body. I wanted to get out of the situation somehow. I was so uncomfortable and distraught and stressed and overwhelmed and just everything. I had no idea what to do. And we just had to wait. We were waiting almost another week by this point to go and have the next MRI. And so I came home and laid on the bed and watched a movie, and I watched War of the Worlds because it had just been added to Netflix. I'd seen it a million times before. I'm really into apocalyptic movies and thrillers and horrors and stuff, much to my husband's disgust because he can't handle those sorts of films. He will leave the room or go to bed. I needed to see someone else's world worse than mine. I needed to see someone else's disastrous life, and I just mindlessly watched that as some sort of comfort. And I remember then reading a book that I highly, highly, highly recommend. It's like my number 2 book of things to read. My other is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, is A Heart That Works. And it's a short novel by Rob Delaney, who's a comedian and actor and screenwriter who lost his son to cancer. And he writes this incredibly raw, it's the most amazing book I've ever read. It was incredibly painful to read it after Herb. But he actually has a chapter in his book where he talks about where him and his wife, in the worst parts of what they were experiencing with their son and his treatment, they'd go to the movies and they'd go and see like horror films. And one in particular is Midsummer, and I hadn't watched it until I'd read his book. And I love that director's movies, and he talks about it in his book that they went and just sat there and laughed through this film. And if you've seen Midsummer, like it's pretty confronting and it's very violent, and it doesn't shy away from some pretty fucked up things. And I was so comforted and I felt so seen that what I had done, because I thought it was really fucked up that I'd gone and watched a horror movie, and then I kept watching.
Because it was.
I kept watching horror movies after that, World War Z and ones that I'd seen before, ones that I knew where it was a disaster in the film. And I was so comforted that it was their escape. And he said exactly why they went to see it. Watch these movies was exactly why I wanted to see it, because I wanted to see someone else's world worse than mine.
I remember personally I just didn't pick anything up that was remotely normal or fun.
And we were trying to keep life as normal as possible for Claude and trying to still have moments of joy and normalcy. It was really, really difficult.
Certain things post it that are still quite vivid though. I remember the tennis being on and certain things at that time of the year.
Yeah, that time of the year is still quite, and I don't like the word triggering. I prefer the word activated, because triggered's been overused and bastardized really. Summers now for me is quite triggering. Even the way the light shines through the house or work, or the smell of summer, the pool for us, because I was so uncomfortable and heavy. We spent so much time at the pool as a bit of relief, and our son loves water. They're all really challenging things to have to live through every summer, because it reminds us of that really, really hard time. So we then have to go down for the MRI. I'm at this point 36 and 4 days. And in Tasmania, you can have a legal termination for medical reason. It comes under the Abortion Act, which I hate, because we've been fed this narrative that abortion is just for people that don't want their babies, and that are, pro-life sort of stuff where people are killing babies and they shouldn't be, sort of thing. And I hate that that's what media and movies and things have made us think of when we say the word abortion. But a termination for medical reason it sits in under the Abortion Act, and you can legally get that done until 36 and 6 days in Tasmania. So throughout all of this, we're not just up against our own morals and values and decisions, but we were faced with a time pressure.
So 48 hours essentially.
Yeah, that we could get the results, make a decision. I had to have a psych assessment, because the legislation is based on the mental health of the mother, is why a termination for medical reason would be granted. South Australia is the only state in Australia that has laws that acknowledge the outcome for the baby. Something that I'd like to change in Tasmania one day, to be as forward focused and considerate like the South Australian laws. Get that presented to a panel, because it can't just be decided on one doctor. It's actually minimum 2, but usually it goes to a panel of maybe 3 or 4. Particularly because it was so late in pregnancy, and then get that approved, get that back to us, and then actually have the procedure. So there was this horrendous time pressure and just shit we needed to get done. So I go down for the MRI. It's the 18th of January, 36 and 4 days. I remember driving down to Hobart, and this is through the whole process for James and I think it was because of our work relationship and James's journey through mental illness, is we've had to become exceptional communicators with each other. And we have to know we can't fix each other's problems all the time, and that a lot of the time when we talk to each other, it's because we just want the other person to acknowledge something we're frustrated with at work or home. And throughout this whole time, we just talked so openly, and we just voice what we were thinking all the time without us needing to think we needed to give an opinion or agree or disagree.
Yeah, we'd always hook into the facts and the people and the possibilities. Definitely get in that last MRI. We had to make some big decisions on accurate information, and what in the end became not so probable. We were quite clear and certain as to what the future might look like.
The process from here was we were going down for the MRI, and there were a number of options we needed to consider. One was go down for the MRI, stay down there and treat the toxoplasmosis in utero It needed to be a compounded medication that was almost as strong as like chemo drugs, and compounded in Hobart, that I hadn't started it yet. When I went to go have the MRI, we quickly picked up the meds because they needed to order all the ingredients and things from elsewhere because it was so rare that they don't have these things on hand. And we were going to treat in utero, and that maybe I'd just be monitored down there, maybe come back home for a bit and then have the birth at the planned time if it was a normal healthy pregnancy as such. The other was to get him out as quickly as possible following that MRI and treat him for the toxo then, and then begin the surgeries from there. Or the obvious third one was terminate. And we didn't know what we were going to do at this point, but I remember asking what a termination at that point would look like and what the process was. And as I just mentioned before, you've got to have a psych assessment. It gets presented to a panel, and then the procedure itself, which I'll talk about in a moment, would then have to be done. So I'm glad I asked that when I did, because I don't think I could have computed that or comprehended what that actually looked like had I have asked after the MRI and when we got those results. So we drive down and I'm wondering, do we need to take baby things? Like, what if we have him and we start treating? I didn't take any baby things. But also, what if we are terminating? I found it really confronting and confusing as to what to take. Do I take the baby stuff assuming everything will be okay, or do I not take the baby stuff? But is that me making a decision or us making a decision before we've made a decision? Am I bringing on a bad omen if I do or don't take things? I'm a very logistics person. I'm a very pragmatic person. I was thinking, right, we need to get the capsule installed. I said to James, we need to get the pram. We need to get the clothes. We need to get this and that, nappies, da-da-da-da-da. But I also was confronted by, I don't want to have to put those things in the car and then unpack it empty-handed when we get home. Like, how awfully confronting will that be as well? So we went down with nothing, and the plan was if we were treating in utero, I was allowed to go home for a little bit and then go back down.
By now he's sick to death of driving to Hobart.
Sick to death of driving to Hobart. But then I realised, and I still have, not so much now, it's taken me a long time, it's taken me years, but I used to have a visceral reaction at this particular point on the highway. For those that know the roads, just at the Ross turnoff, just as you go past Summercoats Cherries, I remember having a visceral reaction to realising that if we are terminating, I don't have anything to dress him in, and that I'm going to need to go to a shop and buy him something to dress him in and thus bury or cremate, whatever we hadn't even discussed that yet, to put him in, and that I probably need to go through the usual polite chit chat. When are you due? What are you having? And I just thought, oh God, I'm just going to have to pretend that everything's fine, that I'm not buying an outfit to say goodbye to my son in. It was, I had a visceral reaction going through that point for years, where my body remembered when I realised that. And I remember the moment we got in the car to drive down for that MRI. Can you remember that I was crying the whole time, and I just kept saying, I just feel like we're driving down to doom. Mm-hmm. We're driving down to Hobart to the end, and it's south, like you are sort of driving down. I just felt like we were driving not to our death, but to doom.
Yeah, it's exactly what it felt like. And we weren't armed with any more information. And I guess exhausted hope that the scans were going to get better.
Mm. So the MRI, they remembered to put music on this time. It was about 45, 50 minutes that this MRI took. And the song that first came on, they asked, what do you want to listen to? And I was like, oh God, I don't care, whatever. And they're like, oh, we'll just put on some easy listening.
Country or pop.
Not country, thank you. And I remember very well that the first song that came on, because I used to be quite a fan, it was Dido's White Flag. And I remember thinking, this has to be a sign that I've just got to surrender to what's about to come next. the white flag's up. I've just got to, I just have to accept it. And I didn't want to look into it whether that was going to be good or bad. I just had to accept. So the MRI is done, and then we go and meet James's best mate, who's just happened to be in Hobart as well at the time. And we sat and had lunch at one of our favourite pubs, which sadly is no longer there, Tom McHugo's. And that was where we always gravitated to because it's right near the hospital. So almost every appointment we ended up going there, and it was just a place that fed our soul. It was good food. It was great drinks, although James got to enjoy the drinks. I did not. I chose not to have anything out of respect of Herb. And it was just a place of like nice people watching. It just always felt like a place that you could go and be whoever you wanted to be in whatever state you were in. Good, bad, happy, sad. You could just go there and be. It was just a really amazing place for the community, and I think especially hospos in Tassie to go. So we had lunch and sat and cried and laughed and joked, and Robbie, James's mate, has the exact same sense of humour, and we just spent some time with each other and just waited to get the results, and they stayed with us that night very kindly to keep us company, and we've got a funny couple of stories of that night that felt like some signs from Herb. They had kindly tried to cook us dinner even though the gas went out, and Robbie's wonderful wife Anna is an amazing cook, and she cooked us gnocchi, and to cook gnocchi without gas or without a stovetop is really, really hard. So she tried to do it in the oven, and it was a bit of a disaster, but we found it quite amusing. James and Robbie walked around the house. I think you were trying to figure it out for like an hour how to get the gas back on.
Yeah, the gas bottle had just been refilled, and for love nor money couldn't figure out whether it was turned on or off or full or empty, and I guess we just come to a conclusion that Herb was playing tricks on us.
Because this was a very dear and generous friend who let us use their house while we were down there back and forth, and he confirmed that the gas bottles had just recently been filled.
And we're talking big gas bottles.
Yeah, and then the next day we tested it and it worked. So it was serious trickery going on. And then subsequent to that we've had, or James has particularly, had many times where the gas has run out, either on ordering a beer, on significant things to do with Herb. We cooked again with Robbie and Anna it was like the night after their wedding as a bit of a celebration, and the gas went out at this Airbnb we were at, and both James and Anna just looked at each other and went, it's Herb. It's just been a number of times where Herb likes to fuck with Dad.
Yeah, the beer one's pretty funny. Well, you go and order a beer and they'll go and try and pull it, and they're like, no, that's actually run out. Just give me a minute, we'll change the keg over, or would you like another beer? And it's happened so many times, and I'll order a range of different beers, and generally it's when we're away, but it's quite amusing.
We go away for his birthday because I just like to escape Tassie, and yeah, the times that's happened at crazy busy, like the Noosa Surf Club, their main pouring beer, and it always seems to run out the moment James goes up.
The place that would have kegs banked 6 deep, 10 deep.
Yep. Anyway, we then get the results that night. Lindsay calls. She had gotten the results and had gone through it with the neurosurgeon down there, and his ventricles were now measuring at 29 and 34. So they'd almost not quite doubled in size again, but they had significantly increased. They were almost 4 times the size that they should be. His brain matter had changed. The brain tissue had thinned. There was calcification. All the ventricles, not just the frontal, the lateral ventricles were impacted also. And the neurosurgeon said cerebral palsy was a certainty, and that was only just the beginning. Lindsay delivered this to us over the phone because we were up against such time pressure. Obviously, it would have been done in person had we had the luxury of time. And I just turned to James and we just looked at each other and just knew without even saying it, we just knew that was not a life for our son.
Yeah, it didn't need negotiating, didn't need asking each other's opinion. We just, it was almost non-verbal. We just looked at each other and just dropped our head and knew the awful thing that had to be done.
When we met with the neonatal paediatrician and Lindsay the next day, the neonatal paediatrician, I remember, very carefully used his words to say that we don't know if this little boy will live for months or years. He did not say hours or days. And that was really telling to me that our son would have lived a life of pain and suffering, a long life of pain and suffering. He was very careful not to say days or hours. And we confirmed with them that we were going to be proceeding with the termination. And I still remember very, very vividly of them thanking us because, and we've talked about this a lot, I talk about it on my socials, that it is a choiceless choice. Termination for medical reasons is a choiceless choice. And all the pro-lifers out there and religious beliefs and things I respect, but it impacts no one else other than the family directly involved. The mother, the father, and any living siblings are the only people that this decision impacts. And we knew that this was not a life for our son of pain. And the challenging thing is that this comes with so much judgment. You judge yourself, but also the societal values that we've kind of been raised on in the Western world would mean that this comes with judgment. And it's really, really confronting. And both the doctors said, thank you, because we see the other side. We see the suffering. We see the pain of those children. And basically what you're doing is the right thing.
Yeah, and 3 years on, like, there's not a moment where we think, and I'm speaking for Bianca, where if we had to make the decision again, it'd be a different decision. We've never once gone, shit, we made the wrong call, or
no.
What if? And this is where sound medical advice and specialists as far as Chicago, that you get given information, and we are good at communicating and we are good at making decisions, but you think the easy decision is just to do nothing. But the hard decision is to do exactly what we did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and James mentioned they found a doctor in Chicago because no one in Australia knew what to do, and the doctor in Chicago had written papers on congenital toxo, and they had suggested that if we were going forward with the pregnancy that we were going to treat in utero, this is how rare this situation was. So I'd had to have a psych assessment with 2 psychiatrists, which is a whole extra level of and layer of trauma, because it was an incredibly confronting hour conversation, and because the legislation is based on the mental health of the mother. And I'm going to summarise this, but preface that this is really, really boiling it down to try and interpret it as best as possible, that basically the legislation exists so that the government don't have blood on their hands. So that if they grant the termination or they don't grant the termination, basically, will you kill yourself? And an hour of conversation, an hour of really, really hard questions, all directed to me. James was there and they did ask you some questions, but it's all based on the mental health of the mother. And this is what I find really frustrating, is that the outcome of the baby and the health of the baby is not taken into consideration, because there would be no doubt that anyone would not allow the termination for medical reasons, so the TFMR, which I'll refer to it as from here on in, the TFMR would be granted had they not assessed and not looked at the outcome for our son. There is no way that any medical professional would say, oh, yeah, sure, he should live.
I guess the excruciating thing is we're already in the situation we're in, but then you need to participate in something that's almost like a job interview. And you're doing your hell best to do the right thing by our son, to tick some legislative boxes.
Yep. And I guess all the questions really boil down to, are you of sound mind? Are you not under too much emotional distress or duress? Like how can you not be? But are you making a decision with some sort of level-headedness, some sort of logic? And I guess the ultimate question really in the end was, will you kill yourself if you're not given the termination or you are given the termination, which is I don't know if I'm explaining that very well.
Yeah, they were very adamant, and they asked the question multiple times to make a report and make a judgment that you're okay, like you're in a sound mind, but the net consequence, if this is taken forward, that you will take your own life, which it's a crazy question to be asked.
They don't give you a huge amount of their own thoughts, or you don't really get a vibe as to whether, because I kept thinking, is this a pro-life thing? If I show that I'm almost too together, that I've got this, are they going to go, yeah, we're not going to grant the termination. This family is going to be able to handle having a disabled son, and we're not going to allow for the TFMR. That's kind of where my head was going.
I just thought, fucking hell, this is another bar we've got to jump over.
Yeah.
And 48 hours from way to go.
And I really want to share this story because I had no idea that this process existed. I had no idea that there was this legislation. I had no idea you need to go through a psych assessment. No one I spoke to tell the story afterwards had any clue. And I guess, would it have made it any easier had I have known? Probably not. But at least having a little bit of awareness that these things exist, that this structure exists, perhaps just would have, I don't know, softened the blow somewhat.
I remember we walked out of there and I said to you, what are we going to do if the panel says no? Like, what happens? Like, what do we do? I can't remember what you said or how you answered it, but I remember thinking we now need to wait on another response or outcome or a result.
This next bit is quite confronting, so perhaps skip ahead if you don't want to hear me talk about suicidal ideation. But I very clearly remembered and thought that if they do not allow for the termination, that I was thinking of ways to not necessarily kill myself, but I knew that was the collateral damage. I was thinking I'd throw myself in front of a bus or throw myself down some stairs or do something to save his suffering.
I guess to hear that as a husband and to know that that's the price a mum's prepared to pay to take care of her son it's a hard thing to hear, and you sort of think that if that happened, it leaves our other boy without a mum, and it's as real as it gets, and it's as raw as it gets in terms of no one should ever be put in that position to make a decision that brutal.
And I remember thinking, I don't want to leave you, I don't want to leave Claude, but I cannot let our son come into this world and suffer in pain. So we then go off to somehow again live the day and wait for the results of the panel that the obstetrician would then present our case to. And I mean, what the hell do you then go and do? So we just drove and we ended up by the beach, Kingston Beach. I think we got some lunch and just sat and cried and talked and waited. And we got back to the house we were staying in Hobart, and Lindsay called, I think it was about 6 o'clock, and said the panel has unanimously approved, which I guess gave us a little bit of comfort that we were doing the right thing. Even though we knew we were doing the right thing, you still feel you need some other people to externally say, yep, this is the right choice, the choiceless choice. So then the next thing, and I guess James said at the start, was about how good I am at compartmentalising. To get through each step of this whole way, I just went, right, I just have to focus on this one thing, and then once that's out of the way, I then focus on the next thing. It was just like, right, I can put that box away, now open the next box. And it was the first scan, the first MRI, right, put that away. Then the amnio, got to get through that. Yep, boxed off, put away. It's the next MRI. Yep, get through that, boxed, put away. Psych assessment, panel approval. Now it's the feticide. And again, you might want to tune out for a bit if this is too confronting, but I want to talk about it because I'd had no idea that this is how it is and how it goes. And I think that as women and allies of women, and for all the pregnant women out there, that we know what this looks like, because it is shocking. And I think if you could mentally somehow prepare for it prior, I don't know, maybe it would help somewhat. So the feticide, which I had no idea that word even exists in our English language, but it does. And it is a process where, because he was so far along, I couldn't just take a tablet. I had to have a needle, sort of like the amniocentesis. So a huge needle goes in through my belly, and then the obstetrician has to very carefully get it into their heart. They then inject fentanyl so that they don't feel anything, and then they inject potassium salts to stop their heart. And then you have to wait a little bit, and then they check with the Doppler that the heartbeat has stopped. And we were scheduled at 36 and 6 days, 4:30 to be at the hospital to have the clinic to have the procedure. And again, what do you do with your whole day leading up to that? We went for a walk down along the beach, and then we were going into the city to meet our friend for like lunch. Alex, my very dear friend, who we just sat and chatted and cried and talked. She brought me a beautiful big box of cherries because her husband is the boss of a cherry orchard, and cherries are like my favourite thing, which then the summer after I found almost a little bit triggering and confronting to then be back in cherry season because I ate so many over that time. And then it was close to being the time that we needed to be at the clinic, and we were like, oh, it was too late to go back to where we were staying, so we just wandered. We just thought we'll just wander around the city because the clinic's right in the city. And James said, oh, you know what? I feel like a Boost juice. Probably haven't had one in 20 years. And I said, well, I know where the one is because I go down to Hobart a lot for work, so I knew exactly where the Boost was, having walked past it. So we went and got a Boost juice and then sat in the mall, just people watching for a moment. And I said to James, I'm like, imagine when someone asks us like, oh, what did you do before the procedure? You know, did you go and light a candle? Did you do this or that? You know, something really nice. I'm like, nah, we sat in the mall.
And a berry buzz.
Again, our light-hearted humour needed to get us through this, and we thought, oh, we better go sit somewhere a bit nicer. So we walked up. It's called St David's Park, and we sat in a park. It's got a little water fountain. And can you remember, it was that time that there was a mum changing a nappy of a baby, and it just hurt like hell to see a mum with her baby. And it was all I wanted. Just such a normal, banal moment that was incredibly painful. And the time came to then head down to the clinic, and I said to James, I'm like, can you take a photo of me? And it was going to be the last time that his heart was beating inside me, and I felt really like icky about taking a picture, but I knew, I don't know, something in me knew that if I didn't get it, the chance of the moment's gone. So I asked James to take a photo. And then James asked a passerby to take a photo of us together, which I'm really glad he did. So, anyone who might be going through things like this, take all the photos, because once the moment's gone, it's gone. Like take the pictures, take them all. Because I look back at those things and I just find it helps me process what we went through. And then we wandered down to the clinic and had the procedure, and it will forever be, there's many a traumatic moment in this whole process, but it will, other than saying goodbye to him, the final time when the undertaker comes to take him, this will forever be the hardest thing, the most traumatic thing I will ever experience in my life. To feel him die, I felt him basically have the cardiac arrest. I thought it was the obstetrician's hand like shaking on my belly, and when I realised, I actually asked her and she said, no, I'm sorry, that's him. I realised it was him having cardiac arrest in my belly, because he was huge. He was just over 3 kilos when he was born. I'll never forget that feeling. And then once the procedure's done and they check with the Doppler, they leave the room for a bit to give you a moment. And just the sound, the scream that came out of my body, I can almost still feel it, but I just didn't think that sound could ever come out of me.
Yeah, utterly brutal to watch, but even more brutal to experience it in your own body.
But I almost think it's harder for the partner to watch, because the unknown, I think, is worse. Like, at least I can attach, like my body felt it. Like there's a process of it's not quite purging, but there's a process that my body could go through because I felt the feels. And for you just had to sit there and watch it. I think it's just as traumatic.
Yeah, and there's no other alternative.
Yep. And when I finished crying, screaming, whatever you want to call it, I looked up at James, and as I mentioned, we were in the middle of town in a sterile environment, and who knows, maybe this little fella had hopped on you when we were up at the park, but
may have come from Boost Juice.
Or may have come from Boost Juice. I looked up at him, and there was this little yellow and black ladybird right in the middle of his top, and I just thought, that is really weird. And I didn't think anything of it until a couple of days after. So we'd had him by this point. I was still in the hospital, and I remember looking it up because I always had this memory that there was something, there's like an old wives' tale. There's meant to be a meaning as to when a ladybird lands on you. And I found that when a ladybird lands on you, when you are sick, it is meant to take away your sickness. And ladybirds have become very significant for us because it just felt like a sign from Herb that we had saved him.
We'd taken his pain away. There's certain things that we always remember, particularly the ladybird and certain numbers.
Yeah, we were hoping, before anything was going wrong, we were hoping he was actually going to be born on the 2nd of the 2nd, 22, and James loves numbers. And see, unfortunately, that didn't happen because I was actually scheduled for a cesarean, a planned Caesar, because Claude was an emergency Caesar, and we'd had a planned Caesar booked for the 4th of Feb. He would have been 39 weeks at that point, and we asked at the time when everything was fine and lighthearted. We said, "Oh, could we maybe book for the 2nd of the 2nd?" And our obstetrician Emily sort of was like, "Let's just see how we go closer to the date." So 222 has been very significant and has come up many times in connection with Herb, and many times where it just can't be a coincidence anymore. It has to be a sign from him. I was never spiritual before this. Never. Like, I'm very skeptical and cynical of all that stuff, and I guess particularly with a behavioural science degree, a very scientific mind. I need the evidence, I need the research, how many people were in the study, all the things, the critical thinking of studies, and now I've become very spiritual, but also, the 222 thing, it just can't be a coincidence anymore. It's remarkable how many times it comes up for us. So my compartmentalising brain went, right, the next thing is the birth. I have to get through the birth now. And then the final thing will be our final goodbye. And the birth was booked for then the next day. The cesarean was going to be in the morning the next day. And I was really nervous and worried about how I'd feel knowing that he was gone and having to have him in there overnight. But I strangely felt at peace and that I was keeping him safe and loved. And I left the clinic surprisingly okay with him being in there. So we had another night of trying to live life. I think we got really good takeaway from Susie Lux. And I still felt like I still wanted to feed him really well, and I wasn't going to have I desperately wanted to have a drink. But I chose not to drink until he was born out of respect of him and his body. And
don't forget we met that useless courier that bought the baby suit up.
I forgot about that. When we had decided that we were going to go ahead with the TFMR, James had the idea to dress him in Claude's first suit, something of meaning. And I'm so grateful that you had that thought, because I couldn't think of that at the time. I was going to get something new sent up that I'd had sitting aside. And our very, very dear friends, Jen and your mum, assisted in getting that stuff couriered down to us. We got a handful of things, a couple of new suits, Claude's first thing that he ever wore, and Claude's favourite muslin wrap sent down so that we could wrap Herb in that too. It weren't that bad. We got it couriered down within the day. And
couriers are the bane of my existence. But this guy was, I knew that he had precious cargo, so I'm a guy of very little trust and faith. So I thought the chance of you losing this between Launceston and Hobart's almost impossible, but still a chance.
We got it. So we turn up to the hospital the next day and prepared to meet our son. Yeah,
it's certainly a sombre theatre and a very, very beautiful crew of people, a great midwife and of course Lindsay doing the operation. And I didn't realise until well after the fact that I'd get PTSD from the theatre, but quite traumatic in terms of the senses for me, but even more so for Bianca. But we had a beautiful midwife that wrapped him up and rocked him and brought him around for me to meet him, and certainly a confusing part in your brain, because it's certainly a thing that there's so much excitement to meet this guy, but there's a certain sadness that it's not like our experience with Claude, but nonetheless as beautiful. And I'm certainly stressed about Bianca and about her having to go through a C-section, and there's certain things go through my mind that there's a chance of her having complications through the procedure.
To meet your baby not breathing is a really confronting thing to get your head around. And then when it happens, it's heartbreaking and beautiful all at the same time. Like, it's so hard to describe because you're still so excited to meet them, to see what you made, what you created, and the joy of seeing that.
And there's a tiny little window where he's still warm, and it's a slither of life.
Yeah, you just imagine, just for you just have moments where you just imagine that they are here, that they are alive and breathing. And when they come out warm like that, it's really confusing in your brain to try to compute what's going on. We had the most amazing team, but as we were about to go in, I'd had this pregnancy cough. I'd had it for months, well before COVID had come back into the state. And the anaesthetist,
Righteous anaesthetist,
tried to stop me going through to theatre. I was all prepped, ready. I was on the bed. We were in that airlock before the actual theatre room. And she said, "Have you been well?" And I said, "Yes, I do have to warn you," because I kept coughing. I said, "I do have to warn you, I have a cough." I said, "I've had it before the borders opened. It's not COVID." And she was going to stop me and send me off for that. What was that long?
PCR.
Yep, the long test, the one that takes like 24, 48 hours to come back before I was allowed to go through to theatre.
I remember Lindsay saw red. She eyeballed all the other people in the room and said, "Can we go to another room and have a quick chat?" And she come back about 45 seconds later and said that everyone's prepared to get COVID today if Bianca had COVID, which I think there's some people in situations like that compassion's a trait that we hold on a pedestal, particularly Bianca and I, and for someone to, I know they've got to follow the script and follow the system, but to sort of see someone like Lindsay take a captain's call and go, pull your fucking head in is compassion in spades.
And as James mentioned, we had the most amazing midwife, and it was the beginning of truly understanding what it means to be seen, heard and acknowledged. And she took Herb off my chest while I was being stitched up because I get the epidural shakes, and so I had the shakes, and she just held him for a bit. And I remember looking over at her and she was just rocking him as though he was here, and it was just the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen to this day. Just the way she treated him with respect and us as a family with respect was just remarkable. She certainly was a big part of the beginning of our healing process because she just took such amazing care of us all in the hospital. Can you remember the anaesthetic nurse that really made a point of taking me back to the room, because normally the orderly comes and wheels you back? And the orderly had come and he's like, "Oh, I've been called to do this." And he's like, No, I've got it. And he walked us back to the room, and then, because he was the only male in the room.
His name was Dustin.
And I remember him, when we got back to the room, and for those that know the medical process, they avoided me going back to recovery. They allowed me to just go back to the room and they would monitor me there so that we could have some privacy and I could stay with Herb. Yeah, Dustin, he shook your hand and just...
He gave me a hug.
He gave me a hug and just tearily said, "Mate, I'm so sorry."
I remember his forearm, he had hair over his forearms like a gorilla. I remember it vividly. And I remember hugging me and I was like, oh my goodness. But again, just a person that shows compassion. I don't think he was too concerned about getting COVID.
Yeah. Something that perhaps professionals might not realise is how meaningful it is for families like ours to see your emotion. I guess that professionalism needs to be, you almost don't show how much it impacts you, but the things that stick in our mind, and it's almost like a conduit to you being able to start to heal, is by seeing that raw emotion from the professionals.
Yeah, because you think they're bulletproof.
It means it made an impact on them, and I don't know, there's something so meaningful about it. So we spent a couple of days with Herb in hospital. We decided on his name the day we knew we were going to do the TFMR. I think it was after the psych assessment. We got back that afternoon and decided on his name, and we'd had all these names tossed up in our minds for a while, and we decided on what order they were going to be. So we decided Herbert means warrior, because we felt like he had been a warrior right up until the end, that he had tried to fight that parasite as best he could, but he just couldn't keep it away, couldn't fend it off. Elio, which means sunshine. We're currently sitting in the sunshine now. The sun is everything to us. You Are My Sunshine is our song, James and I, when we were just a couple, and then I'd sing it to Claude every night, and then it's the last thing that I sang to Herb before we said goodbye to him. And yeah, the sun is a really important part of us. And Theodore means a gift. We were hoping, because Claude is actually his middle name. We didn't intend for him to go by his middle name, but he just did. It just happened. And we loved the name Ted. And we were sort of hoping that Herb would have evolved into one of those three names. And we liked the idea of him being Ted Welsh. But we tend to refer to him as Herb or Herbie now. So we stayed 2 days in the hospital with him. It was really hard for me I tried so hard to be present and in the moment, because I was obviously healing from a cesarean, so I was jacked on endone, and I tried the other one, what's tramadol, and that did nothing, and I was in a lot of pain. And so I was trying to consciously drink in and soak in as much of him as I possibly could. I barely slept. I didn't really sleep at night because I just didn't want to miss him. I didn't want to miss out on this time with him.
And confusing as well, the first couple of days you spend with a newborn, they're just sleeping anyway.
Mm.
So we'd cuddle Herb and pop him back in the chilled cot, and we were told how important it was to keep him cold so then we could spend more time with him. But yeah, for a moment there, I remember waking sometimes in the middle of the night too and just thinking, well, maybe just getting sometimes confused that he's just sleeping and everything's all right.
Yep. The cots are called a cuddle cot, so that they kind of keeps them preserved for as long as possible, so you can spend as long as you want. Some people can take them home. There's sometimes a portable cuddle cot. Because we were in Hobart, we just chose to stay in the hospital, and we were given the option to have the birth up here. But I felt that the delineation of location was going to be helpful for us and for me post, because we live quite close to the hospital here in Launceston, and I just felt that it would be a point of difference, that perhaps it would be a little bit easier to be able to go past the hospital up here. And I think I made the right choice, because I have to go to Hobart a lot for work, as mentioned, and when I go past the hospital, I do still have a visceral reaction, and particularly the exit or the entrance that we left via, because it was kind of like the back door. It's not the main entrance that we left via. And it's right near a place where I need to go often for meetings. And when I walk past it, I can feel it in my gut. It's being out there, being back there. And yeah, the night times I just really felt, like you said, James, that he was just sleeping. And at night times for mums, especially newborns, it's your time. It's a really precious, special time. It's just you. And they're usually, hopefully, quite settled, just feeding and snoozing, and you might be snoozing with them. And I wanted nothing more than to feed him. I was given medication so that my milk didn't come in. Crazily though, 6 weeks to his birthday post, I woke up in the middle of the night and I'd lactated. It was so weird, because I'd had a lot of problems with milk production for Claude, and so for me to randomly lactate was quite bizarre. I remember I turned to James and I woke you up and I was like, I'm wet. I think I think I've just lactated. And you're like, no, it was Frank. It was our dog at the time. He's just probably like drooled on you. I was like, no, Frank's not. Frank's on the floor.
Poor old Frank got the blame for a lot of things.
But yeah, it was a really special time to spend that time in hospital with him. And I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay there forever. I would have happily stayed there forever. I thought, how could I make this work that I just stay here in hospital with him forever?
I think the roast beef sandwiches may have been a deal breaker.
Yeah, the food was pretty bad. And I remember as well thinking leading up to the birth, like, how can I avoid giving birth? Which is completely illogical. But I had thoughts of like, right, is there an option where I don't have to give birth? Ridiculous. I'm almost 37 weeks. But I guess your mind goes to really fucked up places when you are that distressed. So we tried to do as many memory-making things as we could. The midwife very kindly organised for Heartfelt to come and take photos. And that she mentioned it before the birth, and I was like, oh, photos, professional photographer. I was like, oh, God, no, that sounds awful. And then once he was out and born, I was like, oh, I get it now. I really get it now. And we were so lucky. We got the most amazing photographer. He was very experienced in doing these sorts of photo shoots. They're all volunteers. He'd been a volunteer for like 10 or 11 years. He's a professional photographer by trade, and his best friend had a stillborn. And so that was his way of giving back, was to be a heartfelt photographer. And he made us feel so comfortable and so at ease, and he treated Herb with so much respect. It was a really special time. And very fortunately, he'd just had a cancellation, so he was able to get to the hospital within a couple of hours of him being born. The midwife suggested for James to give Herb a bath and to wash his hair. Herb had so much hair, like so much hair. We can't believe how much hair he had. It was really, really special for me to watch it, giving him a bath. The other memory-making things we did were handprints and footprints, photos.
Cut a bit of his hair.
We listened to music with him. We played wedding songs and some of our favourite songs. Triple J Hottest 100 was on at the time on the radio, so we played that in the background for some sort of noise in the hospital. We were very lucky to have a very quiet end of the ward, away from the birthing suites and away from other babies. So I didn't have to hear living babies crying overnight or women giving birth, which I'm very fortunate because that's not always the case in hospitals, particularly in the Launceston one. We just tried to chat to him and talk to him, and we tried to do as much as we could, as much as we had the capacity to. I know other families have read books to their babies, and I wish we had have done that. We didn't have any books with us, and we didn't think to ask. We gave a toast to him. James is a sommelier by trade, and we had a bottle of Pol Roger for Claude's wetting of his head once he was out, and I had a big feed of sushi once Claude was born. And so James went and got a bottle of that, and we toasted to her.
Yeah, it's a tough one. For me, I was originally just thinking, I want the pain to finish as quick as we possibly can, but it's a really special period of time that you think's going to hurt like hell, but it's actually really, really joyous because, as Bianca said, you want it to last forever.
Because you were quite confronted. You got to sign a form, and then I said to James, how long do you think we want to spend in hospital with him? And you were quite confused.
Yeah, it's one of those things I wanted to run away from because it hurt like hell. But when the undertaker came to collect him on the Sunday afternoon, we were trying to buy as much time as we possibly could. We knew we had to say goodbye, but we wanted time to stop.
Yeah, we kept pushing out the time by like an hour here and there for the undertaker to come, and the midwife was really wise, and she said, look, you'll never feel ready. You just have to pick a time. And she was right. And we knew we needed to get back home to our son, Claude, because we had strict instructions for family not to tell him what had happened. We really wanted to be the ones that delivered that information in person. And so we knew we had to get home. And to say goodbye to Herb will be the hardest thing of all of it.
Yeah, I remember I kissed him on the forehead. I said, "So long, bud." And I think I said to you afterwards that I thought it was a fucking weird thing to say. It's such an American, I don't say that in a day-to-day life. And I looked it up. I thought, what's the meaning of so long? And it means that I'll see him again.
Which is so beautiful. When the undertaker came, they come with like a little zip-up bag, and that's really confronting, and unzipped it, and there was this little rocket ship blanket, which for those that know, with Claude we have a rocket ship in affinity. I've got a rocket ship tattoo that he drew with James's sense of humour. He used to joke and teach Claude that he'd draw a dick and balls from the moment Claude could probably talk and say that it's a rocket ship. And so Claude would see them spray painted around the place and he'd be like, "Dad, look, it's a rocket ship." And James would also verse him up to say that Mum loves rocket ships. And we just, the joke went on for many, many, many years, and we thought it was very fitting that the undertaker rocked up and it was a rocket ship blanket. So the undertaker comes and...
Ill-fitting suit, if you sort of know what an undertaker looks like. Really shitty black suit, wide tie, sort of yellow-stained white shirt.
I can't recall that, but poor guy, he was working on a Sunday.
Ill-fitting was a big
Ill-fitting, yeah. And zips him up. I can't remember what I said to him. It was like, it's just, I think I'd left my body already. I'd already disassociated. Of course, I would have said how much I love him and I'll never forget him and I'm so sorry. And I guess that's the thread and the heartbreaking truth or reality that I understand so much of what my mother experienced. My mother was basically forced to give me up for adoption and told to lie to her family, even my father, her husband, that I was a boy and I died at birth. I was the third girl. The doctor got my scan wrong and told her I was a boy. She'd had 5 abortions between my middle sister and I. And in Korea, if you have more than one girl, you're seen as a bad woman at the time. Very much like China. And because she'd already had 2 girls, they were desperately trying for a boy. And she kept my pregnancy because she was told I was a boy. And then when I was born, my paternal grandmother was at the birth and my father was away working. And my paternal grandmother just said, "You can't keep her. You have to get rid of her and you can't afford to keep her." In East Asian culture, the grandmother is often the matriarch of the family and you do as they say. So she did and left the hospital and told everyone I was a boy. And I died at birth. And there's other bits to it. That's the very abridged version. I went through the process of trying to find them. I'd always been told that my parents had separated before she knew she was pregnant. So I'd been given a completely different story. I didn't know this. And that my mother couldn't afford to keep me as a single mum. I grew up with that and I had no problem with it. And then when I found out the truth, it was quite confronting that they're actually married and I'm the youngest of 3. It was very confusing. And then we went and met them. Claude was almost 1 for the first time. We went to Korea as a family to meet them. And my mother, all she could say to me, the first thing she said to me was, "Sorry." That was pretty much the only thing she could say to me for the few days that we spent together in a very limited English. And that was all she could say to me was, "I'm sorry." And then when Herb was born and they put him on me for the first time and I got to see him for the first time, all I could say was, "I'm sorry." And I remember the midwife putting a hand on my shoulder to say, "You have nothing to be sorry for, but I am and I always will be sorry. I'm sorry that it happened and that I'm sorry that he's not here. I'm sorry that he doesn't get to live life." and have the opportunities for all the beautiful things that life brings. And then I hadn't thought of that for, it was probably a few weeks we'd been home, and James said to me, you do realise that what you said to Herb is exactly what your mum said to you when she first met you. And then it was in that moment that I realised that I sadly know exactly what my mother felt. And I almost think, though, that it's worse for her, because when the undertaker took Herb, we were even more unregulated. We were so stressed because he wasn't with us. And we didn't know where he was. I mean, we knew where he was. He was at the undertaker's, but we were like, is he in the morgue? Is he like, where exactly, what room is he in? Is he with other people? Like, where is he?
It's an innate thing as a parent. You just want to keep your kids close to you.
Yep. And it wasn't until we got him back did we feel slightly more comforted. But my mother I was 24 when I made contact with them for the first time. She had no idea where in the world I was. She didn't know. They didn't get any information. They just give them up for adoption and walk away, and that's it. So that's that part of the story. So we left the hospital and we went back to the accommodation. I wasn't in a physical state because of the cesarean to be able to go home. I didn't want to sit in the car for 2 hours. I just needed another day. So we spent one more night in Hobart, and I remember we went back to the house and I had a nap and I fell asleep, and I'll never forget waking up. It was the first time, I guess, in a way that it was kind of over, that I'd slept, and I woke up, and as soon as I woke up, it was the beginning of, when you hear about people saying that they'd forgotten about it when you wake up for those few seconds. And I woke up had forgotten about it just for a few seconds, and then it just all came flooding in that was it. That our son was gone. I just remember sobbing, and I remember you coming in and you just held me silently. We hadn't seen Claude for a week, just over a week. We were desperate to see him. We'd missed him so much, and that was another big struggle. Like, we really struggled being away from him. He's a great source of, your children are, they're driving you insane and they're hard, but they are a great source of comfort. They're still human you created. Claude's great with his cuddles, and whilst he's a wrecking ball of a kid, he is very sensitive, and he's very empathetic, and he's very considerate, even from a very, very young age. And we just sat him down. We walked in the door and coordinated that the grandparents would just walk out, and sorry, this isn't the time to talk to you. We need to talk to Claude. And we sat down and we told him that his brother had died. And the thought of telling him that in the lead up would make me almost physically want to vomit. It would almost make me retch thinking about doing it. And I mean, we did it, and it was awful. It was emotional. I think at his age, he had a level of comprehension, but he was probably more mirroring what we were doing, which was bawling our eyes out. But he asked just the most heartbreaking questions over the next few days, few weeks, few months. And one of the questions, I remember, we were in the car, and he said, a few days later, he's like, Mum, what colour were Herb's eyes? I said, sorry, sweetheart, he didn't get to open them. He said, that's sad. He didn't get to see you. I just find that just such a beautiful question and thinking. It's always stuck in my mind. And
we'll forever wonder whether they were brown eyes or blue eyes, or for a 5-year-old to be curious about those sort of little things. And it's another painful part of it.
I was really confronted with how to tell people. To begin with, I told people that he was born sleeping. I really struggled with the fact of saying that he had died. It was just too hard for me to say, because I felt like I'd forced that death. It was my fault that he had died. And I didn't want to say we'd lost him, because we didn't lose him. I knew exactly where he was. I had to feel him die. So I found it somewhat comfortable to say that he was born sleeping. And it wasn't until was quite some time later that I was able to be really open. I didn't mind who knew. I couldn't publicly put it out there for quite some time that he died from a TFMR, and we need to talk about it more. TFMR is a choiceless choice. We did it out of love and compassion for our son. I've fortunately only experienced a couple of times on socials those sort of comments that we made the wrong decision or that's not the will of God and stuff, and I'm the biggest atheist out. If anything, most people have said if it was us, if it was me, we would have done exactly what you did.
If we had our time again, we'd do exactly what we did. We were very, very measured and compassionate, and Herb's a gift that gives in every day of our lives. Claude did a triathlon yesterday and he drew upon Herb many a times in tough parts of his race because it gave him strength, and he's a gift that constantly reminds us how fragile life is, and there's no guarantees, and shit happens. Bad things happen to good people.
That's right. The story that we're sold is that bad things only happen to bad people and good things happen to good people, but bad things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. It just is, and there's been a lot of work and healing around understanding that and knowing we didn't do anything wrong. We're not being punished for something we've done in some part of our life. Being the people we are, we're knowledge seekers, both James and I threw myself into understanding grief and loss and baby loss, and I left hospital. We got home and I went on Booktopia and I ordered 4 grief books, and I thought, man, imagine the person packing my order thinking this chick's been through something fucked up. And I just wanted to try and understand because I wanted to escape how I was feeling so bad. And the process of healing and understanding grief will forever be trying to understand it. I don't think you'll ever get to a point going, oh yeah, I get it all. But there's certainly been many things along the way that have worked and have not worked. And the process of healing has been so very different for James and I. We've been on a completely different trajectory. And I think that's really interesting as a couple to observe because of both of our experiences in mental health and illness and education, to go, okay, this is quite interesting of how we've navigated it. And we hope to share those insights with you. So next episode, we'll just be talking more about what healing modalities have and haven't worked, as just some suggestions for people as to things that they might want to explore that they might not have thought of already. Thank you for listening. This podcast is dedicated to my son Herbert and to all the fellow grievers out there. I'm sorry that you're here. Be kind to others, but mostly to yourself. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to mention that whilst I do have a degree in behavioural science and have spent years educating myself and researching the topics of trauma and mental health, I'm not a licensed therapist, counsellor or psychologist. Everything I share here is based on personal experience and things I've learnt through education. This podcast is for informational or entertainment purposes only and isn't the substitute for professional advice. If you're struggling, please reach out to a GP or a qualified therapist. You're not alone and there is help available.